In 1988, motorcycle gang violence comes to a small Ohio town. A shocking murder with no warning. When police realize a biker gang might be involved, they ask FBI organized crime experts for help. The gang appears impenetrable, but investigators are determined to get inside and find the killers.
When gangs go to war, they don't care who gets in the way. In 1988, an innocent man was gunned down near Cleveland, Ohio, a victim of a deadly initiation. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. The FBI needed to infiltrate the gang's secretive and violent world. They hoped groundbreaking forensic science would help them put the killers away.
To most riders, motorcycles represent freedom, adventure, and fun. But some bikers come together to form dangerous gangs. As the ranks of these gangs grew in the 1980s, the violent crime attributed to them increased. Like the mafia, their often criminal enterprise drew the attention of FBI organized crime squads, according to Cleveland FBI Special Agent Stuart Schoaf.
The motorcycle gang problem throughout the United States was fairly large at that time. We had a large chapter of motorcycle gang members here in Cleveland.
The principal biker gang in Cleveland made their money off drug dealing, theft of interstate shipments, and extortion. Like mob families, they protected their interests and their secrets with violence. Whenever multiple gangs developed in an area, tensions between them inevitably grew. Across the country, battles for control of territory were intense. When one gang struck against another, retributions always followed. An escalating cycle of wild aggression. In an incident that reflected how far the gangs would go, one biker gang blew up the clubhouse of a rival gang with a rocket launcher. These gangs would do anything to continue their criminal enterprise. Organized crime squads needed to stop them. Trying to develop information on the major gang in Cleveland, agents tried surveillance, but it wasn't easy.
This group knew that they were being watched by us and local law enforcement. When they had a meeting at their clubhouse, they would post a guard out in front of the chapter clubhouse and watch for any suspicious cars in the neighborhood.
The gang protected the people on their street from outside crime, so grateful neighbors would not talk to investigators either. The Cleveland gang might have guarded those in their own neighborhood, but not everyone enjoyed such safety. Around 10 o'clock on the evening of February 27th, 1988, outside Cleveland in Perkins Township, 28-year-old store clerk David Hartlaub and a co-worker had closed the music store where they worked. Hartlaub was headed to a nearby bank to deposit the store's cash receipts. He didn't know he had company inside his van. Or that he was being tailed. For security, his co-worker always followed him to the bank, which was less than a mile away. Neither man noticed the dark sedan on Hartlaub's tail. By the time they got to the bank, his coworker had fallen 20 seconds behind. It took less than that to strike. When the coworker pulled up, he saw the van taking off. He spotted his friend down, but a man with a gun ordered him to leave. Several other customers came to use the ATM and were ordered at gunpoint to stay in their cars. Then the gunman ran off, leaving David Hartlob lying on the asphalt.
911.
There's been a shooting. We need to get someone over here right away.
Where at?
I'm over at the mall.
In 1988, Perkins Township was a small town with only 11 police officers on the force.
Hold on 1 second.
We have shots fired
At the bank behind the mall.
2 or 3 subjects involved, possibly left in a van.
Within minutes, nearly all of the Perkins Township officers were on the scene, including current police chief Tim McClung.
The crime scene overall was very chaotic when I arrived. The paramedics were first approaching the victim. He was on the ground. He was struggling to try and right himself, obviously seriously injured.
Hartlob was in shock, but alive. The number of entrance and exit wounds and the enormous blood loss struck the paramedics. None of them had worked this degree of gunshot trauma before. The best they could do in the field was keep him breathing and stem the blood flow. David Hartlob made it to the hospital, but died 20 minutes later. Police interviewed Hartlob's co-worker and the other shocked witnesses.
Originally, the information coming from the witnesses was very confusing. Obviously, you had different officers talking to different witnesses. The different witnesses saw different things from their perspective. The stories were conflicting, and it was problematic at first.
Investigators concluded there were 3 suspects. One in the van, one driving the dark sedan, and one who threatened the witnesses. The co-worker described him as an Asian or Hispanic male.
A witness saw the victim fall out of the van onto the roadway, and the van drove off. Now, based upon that information, we took a dog out into the field, attempted to do an area search.
Other officers inventoried and collected the physical evidence at the bank. A set of keys determined to be for Hartlob's music store would be checked for fingerprints. And they would send ejected shell casings to the ballistics lab. McClung's tracking dog followed a scent from the bank toward a hotel.
It led about a quarter of a mile around the hotel and back into another parking area where I discovered the van. As we approached the van, I had my weapon drawn.
The dog barked its signal for clear, but McClung and the backup officer had to be sure. There was no one inside. The officers knew not to disrupt any evidence that might be in the van and waited for crime scene technicians to arrive.
We weren't sure if the suspect could still be in the area. I mean, he could have been in a tree line watching us for all we knew.
The technicians began processing the second crime scene to determine what had happened.
There were rounds that penetrated through the back of the driver's seat, through the victim, and out through the door of the vehicle. It went along with the theory that he was ambushed inside the vehicle, that the shooter was behind.
Technicians noted a great deal of blood spatter, mostly on and around the front seat. They collected samples of the blood from each pool for examination at the serology lab. Between the seats, they found a Mac 11 semi-automatic handgun.
The type of weapon we recovered led us to believe that this was not a couple of guys got together and decided to go rob somebody making a night deposit. I mean, this is not a weapon that you typically encounter on a small Midwestern town.
Someone had ground off the serial number and attached a plastic bag to catch ejected shells. Police found it odd that such an evidence-conscious killer would leave the gun behind. Perhaps he panicked or was injured. The Mac 11 had also been modified with a homemade silencer.
It led us to believe that the people involved were quite possibly, for lack of a better term, professional.
But they weren't experts. The silencer was not aligned properly and caused each bullet to split in two, sending shrapnel flying throughout the van.
We knew that he was making a bank deposit, so we were feeling that this was along the lines of a robbery.
Yet inside the van, they recovered the music store's deposit bag.
Yeah, it's got some receipts in there.
Once the money bag was found inside the vehicle with over $4,000 inside, that theory quickly was cast to the side.
The crime scene technicians retrieved multiple bullet fragments and several complete slugs from the van. They determined 13 rounds had been fired, all from behind. A brutal execution.
Somebody wanted him dead. There was a lot of motivation there. Maybe this was a contract killing. Could have been a murder for hire, but somebody definitely wanted him dead.
McClung and another canine handler had their dogs search for the suspect's trail leading away from the van. But neither dog could key on any scent.
As a canine handler, it was my job to interpret what the dog was trying to tell us, and I believe that the dog was telling us that the suspect's left in a car.
As some officers wrapped up the crime scene, the others fanned out across the township, looking for 3 men in a dark sedan. It had been Perkins' first murder in more than 10 years, and police wanted to find the killers fast. Early the next morning, in the adjacent town of Sandusky, 2 officers returned to the Sandusky police station in the middle of what they thought was a routine shift. When their supervisor briefed them on the murder in Perkins, the mundane suddenly became remarkable. They realized they might have seen the shooting suspects the previous night. Hours earlier, the 2 officers had pulled over a dark sedan for making an illegal right turn on red. They had identified the driver as Mark Verdi. The front passenger, Stephen Yee, owned the vehicle. Both men lived in Cleveland's suburbs. The officers noticed Yee wore a belt buckle with the Cleveland biker gang's insignia and a hunting knife, though that was not illegal. The third man was in the back seat, but at the time they had no reason to check his ID. The officers called in Yee and Verdi's information. Everything was in order. Since they were unaware of the shooting, they let the 3 men go. The traffic stop had been at 9:56 p.m., about 5 minutes after the murder, and 3 miles away from the crime scene. The officers said the front passenger, Stephen Yee, and the car closely matched the descriptions given by witnesses at the bank. Sandusky police immediately alerted their colleagues in Perkins, frustrated that the killers might have gotten away because of a technology glitch.
Chief, this is Lieutenant Fiducia.
At the time, the Perkins Police Department and the Sandusky Police Department, which have a bordering jurisdiction, were operating on two separate police frequencies. The officer had no idea that we had just had a shooting.
The belt buckle was an important clue. Police knew anyone wearing the gang's insignia was almost certainly a member. The non-member caught wearing the insignia risked violent punishment or death. Investigators now had suspect names, but if the secretive gang was involved, solving the crime might be impossible.
Investigating biker gangs is a unique investigation. They are very closed-mouthed. They actually, one of the gangs has a saying that 3 people can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead.
After David Hartlaub was gunned down in Perkins Township, Ohio, police developed 2 suspects whom they believed were connected to a Cleveland biker gang. Aware that federal authorities were investigating this very gang as a suspected organized crime ring, local officers called Special Agent Charles Holloway at the FBI's Sandusky Resident Agency.
Yes.
The Perkins Police Department contacted the FBI to see if we were in a position to provide them with any intelligence information on the 2 individuals who had been identified at the time of the traffic stop.
Holloway knew the best source of information was Special Agent Stuart Schoaf in Cleveland, who headed the FBI's criminal biker investigation in the area. Schoaf had been trying to build a file on the Cleveland chapter of the gang.
Well, it's very difficult to investigate a group like that. We worked a long time trying to get more information about them, develop intelligence information, and put together a case on them that would put these individuals away for a long time.
He'd been unable to plant moles inside the secretive gang. But undercover agents had gotten close enough to learn details about its structure. Prospective members, called prospects, wore banners on their jackets listing the city the gang ran in. Full members wore jackets with complete patches they called their colors. The initiation for prospects to earn their colors had its price.
The initiation has to do with some type of violent act towards either a rival motorcycle gang member or an individual that has maybe wronged one of the members.
The requirement of violence was designed in part to weed out undercover law enforcement trying to infiltrate, since no law officer could commit such a crime. Through their ongoing investigation, FBI agents were able to identify many of those involved with the gang, including the 2 men ID'd in the traffic stop in Sandusky on the night of the Hartlaub murder. Special Agent Schoaf knew the passenger, Stephen Yee, was a full-fledged gang member. And the driver, Mark Verdi, was a prospect. The 3rd man was a mystery, but agents were confident he was linked to the Cleveland gang, too.
Hey, last night.
Investigators knew about a rival gang that had a clubhouse in Sandusky. The rivalry between the 2 gangs had been escalating and had recently moved up a notch. Agents had heard of an incident in a bar a few months earlier. The rival gangs found themselves in the same place, and each wanted control of the territory. Bikers consider their colors sacred. A member of the rival gang made off with a prized trophy, the jacket of one of the Cleveland bikers. It was a profound insult. Accusations flew,
Hey, man. Y'all seen these colors?
and no one would back down.
What colors? Colors was on that chair about 2 minutes ago.
I don't see no colors, man.
We had colors right here on the chair.
Where's your buddy? What buddy? The skinny one. Man, there's two of us in here.
The guy that
Well, two of us
Hey,
here.
man, come on. We ain't gonna put up with that, man.
You got a gun!
Hey, man!
In the brawl, one of the Cleveland bikers was shot. Agents had developed a confidential informant associated with the gang. He told them that after the fight, he was at a party where the Cleveland gang talked about the incident. They were looking to retaliate.
Shoot at us. And we do nothing.
And the prospective members saw a perfect opportunity for their initiation as part of the revenge.
Hey, gentlemen.
Investigators who had begun outlining the two gangs realized that a member of the rival group drove a van exactly like David Hartlob's. They might have gone after that gang member and made a mistake, according to Perkins Police Chief Tim McClung.
The victim in the case, Mr. Hartlob, had no criminal record. And there was nothing in his background to suggest that he would have been the victim of a murder for hire. And the similarities between the vehicles led investigators to believe that it was a case of mistaken identity. That he was killed because his van matched the rival gang members' van.
Second guess what they were thinking.
Soon after the murder, the ranks of the Cleveland gang grew, according to Sandusky FBI Special Agent George Steinbach.
We had received information from several sources that a celebration party was conducted at in the Cleveland area to celebrate at least two new members of the biker gang. This would be indicative of them being taken in as full-fledged members as a result of committing a heinous crime.
Because of the strong possibility that the gang was involved, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jim Woolley and the Cleveland Area Organized Crime Strike Force came on board.
There were things that needed to be done from the lawyering end, including going to judges and seeking search warrants. So as soon as it became apparent that we were looking at possibly a hit by a biker gang, the Organized Crime Strike Force was brought in to work with the FBI and the police departments to help coordinate the investigation.
The strike force had a theory as to motive and the names of two of the three suspects, Stephen Yee and Mark Verdi. They needed to identify the third and find the evidence to put the killers away. In Ohio, the FBI believed a Cleveland biker gang was behind a brutal, mistaken identity assassination. They identified two suspects as Stephen Yee and Mark Verdi. The FBI kept them under loose surveillance while they continued the investigation. Special Agent Charles Holloway was trying to identify the third suspect and looked to gang expert Stuart Schoaf for help.
Special Agent Schoaf provided us with background information on Yee and Verdi, and he came up with three names of either members or prospects of this motorcycle gang who he felt were most likely to have been the third person in the vehicle.
Investigators needed to interview those three men. The two bikers they found first had solid alibis for the night of the murder. Non-gang members corroborated their stories, and the two men were eliminated as suspects.
Okay, thank you very much.
The one on the list they could not find was John Ray Bonds. He matched the description of the man in the back seat during the traffic stop.
The FBI agents in Cleveland interviewed various members of his family, and what they were told by family members was that John had gone on a 2-week vacation. It was pointed out at that time to us by his grandfather that John also now had his arm in a sling, and that John had told his grandfather and his mother that he had injured his arm at work.
None of the family knew exactly where Bonds was vacationing. While the Cleveland FBI continued the search for Bonds, the nearby Eastlake Police Department turned up important information about suspect Mark Verdi, the driver during the traffic stop. Detective Bob Jackson developed the lead.
A fraud investigator from a local bank contacted us telling us that, well, I have this fraud case involving Mark Verdi, where he had taken out a loan for several $1,000s, landed up using a $10,000 collateral to get the loan, and then landed up stealing the remainder of the money from a good friend of his.
Like most other investigators in the area, Jackson was familiar with the Hartlaub murder. He knew that Verdi was a suspect and that the FBI needed more evidence on him.
So we're thinking, whoa, we really might have something here. We have a fraud case, a theft case that we can investigate, that we could put together, and just maybe we'll luck out and maybe we'll be able to help out these other agencies with this murder case.
They would not risk any procedural errors, according to Assistant U.S. Attorney Jim Woolley.
When you don't have the defendants or the criminals caught on videotape and people don't confess right away and you're trying to get evidence, you have to get evidence legally. You've got to use search warrants, you've got to use subpoenas, you've got to get evidence in a way that's legal so you can later use it in court.
The Superior Court judge signed a warrant that allowed Eastlake Police to search Verdi's home for evidence in the fraud case. FBI agents accompanied them. Legally, they could only observe.
We went there to look for bank documents, and if we saw anything else that we thought might be evidence or have anything to do with this case out in Perkins Township, we would let the FBI know that we saw something that might be pretty interesting.
Mrs. Verdi? Yes. Detective Jackson, Eastlake Police, Detective Bowersox. We have a search warrant for your premises. Well, it's very
The suspect was not at home, but his wife was fully cooperative.
So, you mind if we come in?
When they explained the warrant and her rights, she let them in.
Sammy, why don't you look around, make sure it's secure.
But it was Mark Verdi's name that was on the warrant, so they decided to wait. They didn't want to do anything that might jeopardize using evidence in a later trial. After half an hour, Mark Verdi came home.
Yeah, I'm Mark. You're Mark? How you doing, Mark? Mark Verdi?
Yes, records. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Okay.
Mark, come on. You let him in. Mark, we got a search warrant for your residence. We got some federal agents here. We got detectives from Eastlake. Yeah,
He seemed unfazed by the police presence.
Take a look at it. Remember that theft case? Do you remember? Want to take a look at it? Remember several years ago you took out that loan from the bank for about $7,000? You had a buddy of yours, gave you 10 grand as collateral. You ended up cashing it, forging the other guy's name. You remember that?
He learned of the fraud case against him and that with the warrant, they could search his entire house.
All right, Ted, Chris, why don't you guys start upstairs? Jimmy, why don't you grab Candy and put on the basement so we can around? I'm going to just shout out. Okay, hey.
Upstairs, the search quickly paid off when officers found papers relating to the alleged bank fraud. But more importantly, they also discovered several items that might help the FBI with the Hartlaub murder.
Ski mask.
We found a briefcase, and you open up the briefcase and there's a mask in there, there's gloves, and the grinder was in there. And shavings, metal shavings.
The grinder and shavings might be related to the serial number ground off the murder weapon recovered from the van.
see this map? Do you see this map? It's all to the area.
The one where you got the stuff.
As we're searching, we see a map, and it's folded up unusually, and we look at it, and you open it up, you look at it, and you see Sandusky, Perkins Township area kind of highlighted and pointed out.
The murder had taken place in Perkins Township, and Verdi was pulled over in neighboring Sandusky. It was time for Special Agent Stuart Schoaf and the other agents to take on a role beyond that of observers.
We decided to get a federal search warrant, and we did that, waiting some time at the residence while several agents went back to the office and drafted the affidavit and search warrant.
With the federal warrant outlining evidence sought in connection with the murder, agents could conduct an additional search of the Verdi home and seize any related items. It did not take long to find more incriminating evidence, including a Mac 11 semi-automatic handgun, the same model as the murder weapon. Its serial number was ground off in the same manner as the killer's gun.
And we also found a pistol in the wood bin. We found trash bags, similar to the trash bag material that was used to make a makeshift cartridge catcher on the Mac 11, which was used for the homicide.
With probable cause increasing, agents secured a third warrant to search the vehicle Mark Verdi drove on the night of the murder. At the Cleveland Federal Building's garage, FBI technicians processed suspect Stephen Yee's car. Though 2 weeks had passed since the murder, the car did contain evidence for Special Agent Holloway.
During the processing, we located 2 shell casings, 9mm shell casings in the vehicle.
The 9mm specification was the right caliber for use in a Mac 11. Agents sent the shells to the FBI's ballistics lab for comparison against the murder weapon.
Some hairs?
The technicians also recovered hair samples from the back seat of the car.
And we found spatters of what was determined to be human blood on the rear of the passenger seat.
Liquefying the blood with distilled water, the technicians collected samples. Agents wondered if the blood got there on the night of the shooting.
Oh, yeah. This bag is.
Testing would show it was not the same blood type as the victims. Perhaps it was the killer's. Investigators recalled that the bullets had been split by the faulty silencer, possibly injuring the shooter. Neither Stephen Yee nor Mark Verdi seemed to have a fresh gunshot wound. But the family of the third suspect, John Bonds, reported he had had his arm in a sling the day after the murder, allegedly due to a work injury.
Now, you're familiar with John Ray Bonds?
To check the story, the FBI interviewed Bonds' employer and asked about the days surrounding the murder.
He advised us that John was scheduled to be at work on the night of February 27th, the night of the homicide, and had failed to appear for work as scheduled and had not been back since.
There was no record of Bonds suffering any injury at work. The pieces were falling into place, but they still had no direct proof.
We obtained a search warrant for hair sample, blood sample, and for John to be examined by a physician for signs of him having sustained some type of a gunshot wound.
They had the warrant. Now they needed to find the suspect.
Just like any other fugitive search, you would interview family, friends, continuously checking back with the employer, spot check his residence, other places that he's known to hang out, such as a clubhouse, friends, bars where he's known to hang out. And all that was done in an effort to locate John Bonds unsuccessfully.
In 1988, Ohio authorities sought John Ray Bonds, who had left the area after a murder in Perkins Township. After weeks of searching for Bonds, Special Agent Charles Holloway got an important call.
On March 14th, 1988, John's attorney contacted the Cleveland office of the FBI and said that John knew that the FBI was attempting to locate him and that he would present himself at the FBI office in Cleveland on March the 16th of 1988, which he did.
Agents served Bonds with a warrant requiring him to give a blood sample. The doctor concluded a fresh tattoo on his arm covered a recent injury. Bonds did not know the FBI was developing innovative DNA profiling technology that might conclusively match a suspect's blood to samples from a crime scene. Agents hoped that if they did find a match, the courts would accept the new science as evidence.
We had a very good circumstantial case against him based on all of the interviews that we had done. But we did not have fingerprints from John Bonds.
With only circumstantial evidence, prosecutors did not want arrests yet, so Bonds was released. Then, on March 22nd, an Ohio Department of Transportation cleanup crew working the highway outside Sandusky discovered the vehicle title for David Hartlob's van. Nearby, they found a handgun, a wool hat and a glove, and a box of 9mm ammunition, the caliber used in Mac 11s. Aware of the Hartlob murder, they called authorities. The placement of the items further implicated the Cleveland gang for prosecutor Jim Woolley.
It happens to be a state highway that would connect Sandusky, Ohio to Cleveland, Ohio. It would be a route that someone would travel if they were driving from Sandusky on their way back to Cleveland.
The suspects might have thrown the items out the window as they drove away from the crime. FBI technicians collected the evidence for analysis. Examiners at the FBI's Hairs and Fibers lab compared the evidence from the highway to evidence they already had.
Fibers consistent with that glove had been located on the murder weapon. Fibers consistent with that glove had been located on a shirt which was removed from Mark Verdi's house during the March 9th search warrant. And fibers were found on the glove consistent with the carpet in David Hartlob's van.
Additionally, a hair found on the glove matched a hair recovered from the back seat of the car the suspects were in on the night of the murder. At the Firearms and Tool Marks Unit, FBI examiners worked on the murder weapon, trying to find a trail to its owner.
The murderers had gone to great lengths to try to make this gun not traceable, they thought, and they ground down the serial number such that you couldn't see it. But through a chemical restoration process, the FBI was able to raise up the serial number and identify the serial number, even though you couldn't see it with the naked eye, and then you could trace that gun.
Checking the records of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, investigators found the murder weapon's registered owner. He confirmed that he used to own that Mac 11 and the one found at Verdi's house. But several months earlier, both guns had been stolen from his car, which he had parked outside a friend's house. That friend's name was Stephen Yee.
Here we have Steve Yee is stopped in a traffic stop minutes after the homicide in Sandusky, Ohio, and we can show that the murder weapon was stolen from a vehicle parked in front of his residence several months before the homicide.
The circumstantial evidence against Yee, Verdi, and Bonds was building. But agents wanted something more definite before they made arrests. In April 1987, they learned of a breakthrough regarding the blood evidence in the case. FBI serology experts had determined that the blood in David Hartlub's van had actually come from two individuals, presumably the victim and an assailant. Examiners compared the blood from the victim's van to that from the suspect's car.
The lab came back and told us that the blood which had been recovered in Steve Yee's vehicle matched the blood that had been recovered in Hartlub's vehicle.
The match was at the blood type level only. Still, it meant that the man in the back seat at the traffic stop was likely the killer in the van. They hoped the revolutionary DNA technology being developed would reveal a more exact molecular match.
I had read an article in one of the FBI publications that the FBI was putting together its DNA unit, and they were in the process of doing research. So inasmuch as we had blood in our case, which we felt could possibly be compared with a suspect, I contacted the section chief that was in charge of putting that unit together and spoke to him about the possibility of doing a DNA analysis in this case.
At the FBI lab in 1988, examiners like senior scientist Dr. Bruce Bedoli were still testing the groundbreaking forensic science of DNA profiling.
DNA is the blueprint for what you are, what I am, for what all living things are. So if we could tap into that blueprint, we could tap into information that help us identify individuals.
Examiners were working to establish a scientifically sound way to profile the DNA from a known source, like a suspect's blood, and compare it to the DNA from an unknown source, like the blood left at a crime scene.
And we generate a profile of, looks something like a barcode, that then we compare that barcode to another barcode. And the barcodes are in the same kind of pattern. They may have come from the same source.
By early 1989, after years of testing quality control, the examiners believed they were ready to use the science in the federal courts. The Hartlub case would be the first one. Examiners profiled the DNA sequence from the blood in the van and from the blood of John Bonds. Comparing the markers of the two sequences, they made a match. Exactly the evidence Assistant U.S. Attorney Jim Woolley needed.
The DNA was a critical piece of the puzzle because it provided virtually conclusive evidence that John Ray Bonds, a member of the biker gang, the third man in the backseat of the car with Steve Yee and Mark Verde, stopped 5 minutes from the homicide, had bled inside the van.
March 7th, 1989. More than a year after the murder, it was time to bring in the killers. In the hours before dawn, SWAT teams prepared for a simultaneous takedown of the three suspects. They knew it was safest to catch them while they were still asleep. The teams fanned out to the homes of Yee, Verde, and Bonds. They hoped to strike before the suspects could warn one another or flee. One team moved on Verde's house, while another entered Yee's.
FBI, step outside! Step outside! Step outside now, sir! Come out!
Mark Verde was arrested without a struggle.
Anybody inside?
At the same time, and 20 miles away, his fellow gang member Stephen Yee was taken into custody as well. But the third suspect, John Ray Bonds, was not at home. Nor was he with known family members. The man investigators believed was a ruthless assassin was again on the run. In the summer of 1989, authorities on the trail of fugitive John Ray Bonds had him profiled on a nationally televised crime show. On the program, they described Bonds, his distinctive tattoos, and the places he frequented, hoping someone, somewhere, would recognize the suspected murderer. On the afternoon of November 8, 1989, a patron at a bar in Paducah, Kentucky, spotted Bonds. He remembered the tattoos on the fugitive's hands from the TV show and took a chance. He contacted the local sheriff, who called the FBI resident agency in Paducah. They were ready to arrest Bonds, but they had to be careful, according to Special Agent Stuart Shove.
They felt that going into the bar there may be some trouble if they entered the bar at that point, because there were a lot of biker types in the bar, and they did not want to have any type of confrontation. They felt it would be much safer to set up some type of roadblock.
The FBI, Kentucky State Police, and local officers staged a fake traffic accident on a road leading from the bar to a known biker clubhouse in the area. When Bonds and another gang member left the bar, agents followed. As they hoped, the pair headed toward the clubhouse and got on the blocked road. The trooper waved them forward.
Don't worry about it, this big girl.
And undercover police pulled in behind them. Though he didn't know it, Bonds was surrounded.
Get out of the car! Get out of the car right now! Out of the car! Hands on the car!
Nearly 2 years after the murder of David Hartlaub, John Ray Bonds was finally in custody. Now, he and the other two suspects, Stephen Yee and Mark Verdi, would stand trial for the killing. FBI senior scientist Dr. Bruce Bedoli had to help convince federal judges that the DNA evidence should be allowed in the trial.
New technologies, as they enter the court, will be challenged for their admissibility. So I had a role in going in to defend the technology, to demonstrate that it met the scientific standards to be admitted into court so that the jury could hear about the evidence in the first place.
After months of hearings, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jim Woolley succeeded in getting the DNA evidence ruled admissible. With it and the other evidence, he went into the trial confident.
This is a case where just piece after piece after piece of evidence was built through forensic testing, ballistic testing, serology, forensic chemistry, hair and fiber analysis, DNA analysis, serial number restoration. And you start just building those things one on top of the other. And there's really very little that a defense attorney can say when faced with a case like that.
Stephen Yee, Mark Verdi, and John Bonds were all convicted of murder and sentenced to life. The unrelenting investigation put 3 killers behind bars and helped open the door for a forensic technology that has changed criminal investigations forever. Blazing fires, raging adrenaline, and total anarchy, all within the walls of a federal prison. FBI tactical teams and negotiators work around the clock, trying to avoid a small-scale war and keep nearly 100 hostages alive.
In the 1980s, the federal penitentiary in Atlanta housed some of the country's most notorious prisoners. 1,800 Cubans fleeing Castro's regime. 400 were hardened criminals. 200 were insane. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Castro called them undesirables. The U.S. government called them detainees. In 1987, they staged a bloody revolt. Now the FBI and special operations teams must infiltrate a burning prison to stop the violence before it rages out of control.
Cuba, 1980. A plummeting economy and political unrest prompt Fidel Castro to allow Cuban citizens to leave the country. For the first time in history, the notorious dictator permits American boats to enter Cuba's Mariel Harbor. In a 5-month period, over 120,000 undocumented refugees flee the country, heading for Florida. 2,700 are considered criminals or mentally ill under U.S. law. The Attorney General instructs the Bureau of Prisons to find space for them in America's already overcrowded prison system. 1,000 Cuban refugees are sent to the Federal Detention Center in Oakdale, Louisiana. Nearly 1,400 are transported to the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. For 7 years, the U.S. and Cuban governments negotiate to send the criminals and mentally ill refugees back to Cuba. On November 20th, 1987, the State Department strikes a treaty with Cuba. Over 2,700 Cuban detainees will be sent back. Within 24 hours, Cuban detainees in both prisons get news of the decision. In Oakdale, Louisiana, 1,000 of them riot, taking 28 prison guards hostage. But at the Atlanta Penitentiary, all is quiet. Warden Joe Petrovsky.
There was a trust between the detainees and the correctional officers, and that trust was basically the treatment that the detainees got from the correctional officers.
Early Monday morning, 3 days after the treaty is signed, prison employee Ted Manier arrives at work. He notices an eerie silence.
There were hardly any inmates in the breakfast area. And normally it would be full of inmates were making a lot of noise and talking, and there was hardly anybody in there, so it was really quiet, unusually quiet.
On the first floor of the Prison Industries building, detainees make mattresses. On the surface, it looks like business as usual. But in an instant, detainees overpower their guards and ignite fires. On the third floor of the Industries building, Manier and his supervisor oversee a furniture-making shop. In a matter of minutes, the riot spreads to the rest of the floors.
It sounded like a roar, and it was coming up the stairwell. They got the door down, and they just came running in. And they had these hoods over their head, like they were made out of gray t-shirts or gray sweatshirts, and they just had holes poked out for their eyes so they could see.
Manier tries to report the emergency, but he is attacked by one of the rioters.
And I don't know if he was trying to hit me or just the telephone out of my hand. He knocked the phone out of my hand and it went across the room.
Prison employees are facing their worst nightmare. Although they are well aware of the risks, they never thought it would happen to them.
But we did realize there was a threat, but I guess you think you can control it. When you work with inmates, you get used to them, and sometimes you forget who they really are.
The guards and factory workers are helpless. Unarmed and outnumbered, they face rioters carrying homemade weapons. The staff member notifies Warden Petrovsky of the crisis.
Inside the wall, nobody carried weapons. The inmates always vastly outnumbered the staff. So if we had weapons in there, we could lose those weapons. The only weapons that we had was weapons in the tower.
Petrovsky alerts the FBI and the prison's regional director.
I try to give him an assessment of exactly what transpired and brought him up to date.
As fire spreads throughout the Industries building, the detainees force the guards and employees into a tool cage and lock the door.
We kind of thought that unless there was some miracle, that we would probably just burn up because there was no way to get out of one of the cages.
The riot spreads throughout the entire penitentiary complex. Enraged detainees capture guards, taking keys as they take hostages. They begin to release the regular prison population from their cells. The riot is beyond containment. The detainees now control most of the central buildings. Rioters attempt to gain access to the main cell block, but guards lock down the sally port just in time. As flames and smoke engulf the massive prison complex, nearly 100 guards and employees are trapped inside. Built at the turn of the century, the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary is the largest penitentiary in the United States.
It was a fortress inside that was surrounded by a wall. It raised from the ground approximately 40 feet, and the width on the top of the wall was approximately 3 yards wide. So it was a massive, massive wall.
Show me what you got.
The penitentiary is built on 300 acres of land, with 28 acres of property inside the walls.
Okay, well, we've got guards.
Warden Petrovsky needs to figure out exactly where his people are located inside the complex.
We had staff members in 11 towers that had very good observation over the entire outside compound, who logged those employees that they recognized in those areas. We started a list of the officers that we thought were hostages.
Ted Manier and his colleagues are trapped inside an equipment cage in the burning Industries building. Several rioters try to convince the Cuban detainees guarding the cage to unlock the door.
They were trying to talk the guard into opening the door because they wanted to get us out and kill us or do whatever. So the guard had to tell them that they couldn't open the door, and occasionally they would push one off for getting a little wrestle.
But the raging fire threatens to destroy the building. So the rioters are forced to move their hostages to another part of the prison complex. The only route takes them across the yard in clear view of the towers. A tower guard spots what he believes are detainees threatening prison employees.
There was a guy that was up ahead of me, and he got hit. I remember seeing him. He was a Cuban. He got hit right behind the ear.
One of the hostage takers is killed, and 5 others are wounded.
I was getting worried because the bullets were going pretty close around where we were.
Chaos reigns as guards and detainees run for cover.
They ran us across to the corner of the building where they couldn't shoot at us. And that time they took us in the chapel.
Detainees force their hostages into a small room and lock them inside. Less than an hour after the riots begin, FBI agents from the Atlanta field office arrive at the penitentiary. The FBI has jurisdiction over criminal matters in all federal prisons. Warden Petrovsky briefs Weldon Kennedy, the special agent in charge.
The first thing that I wanted to accomplish was to find out how many hostages had been taken, how many might be injured, what was the threat to those people who were in fact taken hostage. All of these people were like on an emotional high. I mean, they'd been prisoners for literally 8-10 years. Some of them serving life sentences, and now they're free to roam around the prison. It was like a holiday.
This is the area where they...
Agent Leon Blakeney heads the Atlanta FBI SWAT team. Agent Blakeney appears in silhouette to protect his identity.
Nobody really knew what area that the inmates controlled, and they really didn't know how many hostages were taken.
You had 2,500 people housed in that institution.
Here's the administration.
There were people running around all over the place, and quite frankly, it was chaos.
Chaos that had already turned deadly. As agents Kennedy and Blakeney developed their plan to retake the prison, they received critical intelligence from two sources. From FBI agents posted outside the walls of the prison complex, and from prisoners inside the walls who don't want any part of the riot.
We began to learn who the hostages might be, where the detainees were holding up, how many were there, what kind of weapons they might have.
The detainees have taken the guards' radios, compromising prison communications. Agents and guards switch to a secure frequency.
2 white males and 2 black males.
The situation is grim. Negotiations will be critical to resolving the standoff. Special Agent D. Rosario, an FBI negotiator, opens up a dialogue with the rioters.
Unreasonable demands are being made. The hostage takers want things done now. And that's why it is so important to try to bring them down to a level where they can be reasonable. Can you negotiate with people at that very high emotional level? Generally speaking, no. So we had to give it time.
The rioters are emotionally charged, angry over the shooting death of a detainee.
This theme came up time and again. You killed one of ours. You had no reason to, and you killed him. And they wanted me to see the bodies, so I had the body brought out to where we were. I looked at the body. They wanted me to get emotionally involved with them. And these 4 that originally came out to talk to me really were only speaking for themselves. They were not speaking on behalf of the 1,400 that were in there.
In the command post, Warden Petrovsky receives a frantic call from 16 employees who have barricaded themselves in cell block E. E block is home to the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary's most dangerous criminals.
These particular group of inmates were locked away in E to keep them from harming someone.
If the detainees get into cell block E and free the inmates, the lives of all 16 employees will be in danger. The E cell block is also home to the prison system's most notorious inmate, Thomas Silverstein.
A number of people in the Bureau of Prisons told me that he singularly was the toughest prisoner they believed that the Bureau of Prisons had ever housed or had in their custody. He was just an absolute animal, and he hated everything to do with the Bureau of Prisons or any of their staff.
Silverstein was incarcerated in 1975 for a bank robbery. Years later, he was sentenced to multiple life terms for fatally stabbing an inmate and a prison guard.
Thomas Silverstein was cold and he was a killer. He had two things on his mind: to escape from jail because his crimes were such where he was going to die in jail. And the other objective was to kill people. It was as simple as that.
The guards in cell block E are in grave danger. Special Agent Kennedy works with the FBI SWAT team to come up with a plan to rescue them.
The SWAT analysis was that they believed that they could go over the wall out of view of the rioting detainees and retrieve those people out of that building successfully.
The SWAT team will need ladders to get over the 40-foot-high wall. Special Agent Blakeney calls on the Atlanta Fire Department and a National Guard helicopter crew to help carry out the plan.
We put a helicopter up on the opposite side of the prison to attract their attention and at least have some diversion.
Here's the situation. We've got a hostage crisis.
7 hours after the riot began, the FBI SWAT team launches a daring mission to rescue 16 prison employees without endangering the lives of nearly 100 hostages.
Okay, listen, we need to put a truck up on the southwest corner with the ladder up. Everybody got it?
7 hours after a riot breaks out at Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, an FBI SWAT team launches a mission to rescue 16 employees barricaded in one of the prison's cell blocks. FBI Special Agent Weldon Kennedy knows that if the rescue attempt is seen by rioting Cuban detainees, it could spell disaster.
They would not hesitate to kill hostages if it became apparent to them that we were going to try to retake the prison or retake any part of it.
After scaling the wall, the FBI SWAT team approaches cell block E, home to the prison's most dangerous inmates.
Guard, come out, guard! Guard, now!
SWAT rushes the prison employees out of the building.
Keep your head down. Identify yourself when you get down there.
Across the prison yard, 27 employees, afraid for their safety, have barricaded themselves inside the prison hospital. Frustrated, they watch as their colleagues are escorted to safety. FBI SWAT team leader Leon Blakeney.
You know, they're screaming, frantic, you know, come and get us, come and get us.
The director of the Bureau of Prisons urges the FBI SWAT team to go back for the hospital employees.
The SWAT personnel informed me that there was a 100% probability that they would be detected going over the wall to try to effect a rescue of the hospital people.
We can't protect the other hostages that are being held in other parts of the prison. And my concern was if in fact we were observed, then they would start killing the other employees.
Blakeney wants to rescue the hospital staff, but knows it's a risk he cannot afford. The detainees break into cell block E and release the inmates. Vicious criminals run free, including Thomas Silverstein, a ruthless killer. As darkness falls, 3 buildings have been consumed by fire. Nearly 100 guards and employees have been taken hostage or have barricaded themselves inside the prison. Prison employee Ted Manier is being held inside a room in the prison's chapel.
So a man came up to the window, and he wasn't a Cuban. And the guy beside me said, "That's Silverstein." And he came inside, and he had a flashlight, and he started shining his flashlight. He shined the light on me, said, "Don't I know you?" I told him, no. I said, I've never seen you before. And he said, you don't know who I am? He looked worse than anything I've ever seen in any type of movie or anything. And when you look at him, you'd know he isn't a normal. There's something strange about him. He's really scary.
Detainees finally distract Silverstein and he leaves without harming the hostages. On day 2 of the standoff, FBI Tactical Commander Danny Colson arrives at the prison.
You could hear this huge roar. It was like 1,000,000 bumblebees. You could almost feel the energy of those rioting prisoners.
Colson started the FBI's hostage rescue team, an elite counterterrorism group in 1982. The HRT is law enforcement's equivalent to the Navy SEALs or the Army's Delta Force.
The only unit in the United States that has a sophisticated explosive or thermal breaching capability is the FBI's hostage rescue team.
But the HRT is already tied up, handling the riot at Oakdale.
So I was going to a very difficult tactical assignment without the team I was used to commanding.
Despite not having the hostage rescue team available to him, Colson must still develop a full-scale tactical rescue plan. He faces several obstacles.
A prison is built to keep bad guys in. You have barred doors, you have steel gates. Well, these same type of things keep a rescue force from getting in. I needed help from the military, primarily from the Delta Force.
Delta Force is the Army's Special Operations Unit, but using them at the prison would be illegal.
A posse comitatus law was passed right after the Civil War, and that law prevents the military from being involved actively with their personnel in civil law enforcement.
Barring approval from the White House, the FBI must rely solely on civilian law enforcement. Weldon Kennedy assembles over 400 SWAT members at the prison.
We had SWAT teams from all around the country, Chicago, New York, as well as, of course, the immediate surrounding area.
We figured that based on the capability we had, we were probably maybe an hour away from getting in to rescue the hostages. We were all concerned that they started killing hostages. We were helpless to get in there. And that's one of the reasons that De Rosario and the other negotiators were working so hard to try to get somebody to talk to calm the situation down.
But the negotiations are not going well. None of the rioters De Rosario has spoken with has enough power to influence the detainees. The negotiators need a different approach.
We could be here for a very long time unless we come up with a group of people in there among the detainees that can speak basically for, if not all of them, for the majority.
Rosario asks prison employees which detainees command the most respect.
Files of these people were opened to us, and we looked at several of them, and we decided on 5 or 6 men. We went to the grading and called them by name, and they came to the grading, and we invited them to come over to our side and sit down at a table with us and talk with us.
The detainees agree to talk with negotiators.
And we began our first serious conversations in terms of how can we resolve this? What is it that you're looking for? The number one demand that they had was that ultimately the Immigration and Naturalization Service conduct individual hearings for each and every one of them to remain in the United States.
It's a straightforward request. Rosario agrees to pass it on to the Department of Justice. As the meeting ends, the negotiator uses a bit of psychology to help solidify the group's standing as leaders within the prison.
We decided to give these men the mail that had accumulated since before the riot began.
In the penitentiary, daily mail is an important link to the outside world.
They went back in there, and we could literally hear the shouting of glee when these guys showed up with 2 bags full of mail. We believe it created in the minds of the others that these guys could get things done for them. And that's where it began. After that, we kept asking for the same men.
Rosario is beginning to make progress, but negotiations go slowly. In the prison hospital, 27 trapped employees are out of time. Detainees are trying to break down the door of the hospital with a battering ram. The employees call Warden Petrovsky in the command center. Warden Petrovsky relays the information to Weldon Kennedy. Detainees could break through the hospital doors at any moment.
We had 27 people in there, and there was concern that once the hospital was taken over, they might be injured or even killed. So the ram is going, we can hear it as a matter of fact, banging the metal doors of the prison.
Bureau of Prison officials worry about what could happen if detainees get access to the drugs and narcotics stored in the hospital.
What about right here?
Weldon Kennedy asks HRT Commander Danny Colson for a second assessment.
I said, yeah, we can get them out. We can go over the wall. We can defend the area with a perimeter and slide them out over the walls, and we're out of there.
Colson's biggest concern is that the detainees are watching news coverage of the riots.
Inmates were watching TV to see what we were doing as much as they could. And they could very well believe that a rescue of the entire prison was underway, and then they could start executing the hostages.
Hospital workers are moments away from becoming hostages, or worse.
So here we have a huge dilemma. Do we go in and take those people out of the hospital and save them, or do we let them be taken hostage?
Kennedy decides a rescue is too risky.
My decision was based on all the information that I had. We will not go for the rescue. I will not authorize the rescue.
And when he went back in and announced it to the Bureau of Prisons, I remember one Bureau of Prisons official storming past me and looking at me and said, if those are FBI agents, you'd go get them. And I said, no, we wouldn't.
Weldon Kennedy wonders if he has just signed a death warrant for 27 innocent people. For 2 days, a riot rages at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. Dozens of Cuban detainees now control the prison. 27 Bureau of Prison employees are trapped in the prison hospital. Weldon Kennedy, special agent in charge of the FBI's Atlanta field office, makes a tough decision.
If we entered the penitentiary, if we tried to retake it, there was a threat they were going to immediately kill them all.
Kennedy decides not to launch a rescue mission. 2 hours after the decision, communication is lost with the employees in the prison hospital.
It's the warden. Pick up if you hear me.
I knew that if anything happened to any one of those 27 people, that I would forever live with that as being the person responsible.
Guards stationed at the prison towers gather intelligence as detainees move hostages across the prison yard. One guard calls the FBI command post with a disturbing development. A group of detainees is dragging acetylene tanks into a basement where they can access the prison's utility tunnels. Danny Colson is the FBI's tactical commander at the scene.
They might be able to bring those tanks and get enough of them underneath our command post where the tunnels ran and cause an explosion, which would have decimated the command post and maybe have allowed them to escape.
Colson and the FBI SWAT team prepare to go down into the tunnels.
The tunnels were designed for two purposes. One is all the utilities went through the tunnels, the steam pipes, the electrical pipes, and they were big tunnels. There were also ventilation tunnels that started big enough for a man to walk in standing up and ended up only a few inches high.
Colson and SWAT team leader Leon Blakeney have no idea what they will encounter once they are inside. Prison maps aren't reliable, and communication with agents above ground is not possible. As the team makes their way through the underground maze of pipes, they encounter a group of detainees. Leon Blakeney.
Once we got in the tunnels, we discovered then that in fact the Cubans were in there.
And oftentimes we'd come in very close proximity to them, within 10 feet of them. There would be a bunch of them, and we'd confront them, and fortunately, every time they'd turn around and run.
The SWAT team is unable to find the acetylene tanks in the vast underground system, but they are convinced the detainees are exploring the tunnels for a possible escape route.
We decided that the tunnel system was a real threat to the successful resolution of the crisis.
Ultimately, we were able to station SWAT teams down there. The Chicago SWAT team handled one part of the tunnel system, and the Washington Field Office SWAT team handled another part of the tunnel system.
On day 3 of the standoff, Danny Colson receives intelligence from agents with high-powered binoculars positioned around the prison. The detainees have moved nearly all the hostages to a building known as the American Dorm. Colson begins to formulate a tactical rescue plan.
What do you think they, what can they...
Outside the prison, crowds gather. Families of the hostages, the prison guards, and even the detainees wait for information about their loved ones. The media covers breaking news from the penitentiary.
There was hundreds of media people there. There were networks, there was local TV. They established a tent city right across the street from the prison.
A single reporter and a simple error threatened to bring the standoff to a violent end. Special Agent D. Rosario.
The New York SWAT team was coming off shift, and the Chicago SWAT team was coming on shift, and they passed each other right at the steps of the administration building. And it looked impressive because there was two very large groups of armed men, all dressed in black.
Local reporter in Atlanta is watching this and sees these 40 or 50 men dressed in SWAT gear going up the front steps, and jumps to the conclusion and says so on live TV that, well, there they go. Looks like the FBI is going to retake control of the prison.
When the detainees see the media report, they take immediate action.
They brought several hostages out to the yard. And for the benefit of our cameras, so we could see them, they brought these hostages out and they poured gasoline over them. And then they took their cigarette lighters out and began clicking while literally screaming at us, "If you want to assault us, go ahead. As soon as you do, we're setting fire to these men."
Without knowing it, a young journalist may have just made a mistake that could cost the lives of nearly 100 innocent people. At the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, FBI agents negotiate with Cuban detainees who have taken over the prison. The lives of nearly 100 hostages hang in the balance. On day 3 of the standoff, a journalist's error ignites a crisis. FBI Tactical Commander Danny Colson.
All along, our negotiators have been telling the Cubans that we weren't coming in, that we wanted to negotiate and wanted them to surrender, and now a reporter is saying we're coming in.
The erroneous media report makes Special Agent D. Rosario's job even tougher as he negotiates for the lives of the hostages.
We had brought them down to such a reasonable level of emotion, and when they thought that the FBI was about to assault, they literally lost it.
We came literally within a few heartbeats of losing the hostages right then and there.
We sent everybody to what we call phase line green, which is the last position you are in before you do a rescue. It was like a spark that was about to ignite this terrible inferno of energy we had built up there.
I had to convince them that no such assault was going to take place, and that, you know, if things were going so well and so positive, why would we even think about assaulting them?
After 3 tense hours, the rioters agree to continue negotiations and spare the hostages.
We're just lucky that our negotiators were able to calm them down and we didn't have any loss of life.
For Colson, the close call is a warning sign that the standoff could explode into a full-scale riot with very little provocation. At the end of day 3, he obtains presidential approval to deploy Delta Force in a civilian crisis. The Special Operations Team arrives in Atlanta disguised as FBI agents.
There were 3 things that I desperately needed from them. The first was their breaching capability. They had all the breaching capability that would be necessary to get back into that prison to do a dynamic rescue. They had the ability to use explosives to blow steel doors down or blow locks out. They had the ability to use thermal devices to cut in an instant through steel and cable. The second thing I wanted was their sniper capability. When we went into that prison, if we had to go in, I wanted the very best snipers I could find doing cover for my men as they went in. The other thing is they have tremendous medical capability.
They travel with a complete hospital. They set up with the doctors, nurses, emergency equipment, the latest state-of-the-art everything.
If Delta Force or FBI teams engage the detainees in combat, the military hospital is prepared to treat any injury.
They can bring their doctors right in with us. They can pop a chest and do open heart surgery right there in the premises if necessary.
For the next several days, Delta Force snipers keep the detainees under constant surveillance. The rioters are working 24 hours a day, making weapons by the thousands.
There's all kinds of steel inside the prison, and they were very resourceful with the equipment. They ground weapons into spears. Each one of them must have had at least 2 weapons.
Delta Force sets up surveillance cameras all over the complex to track the movement of the detainees. Agents look for ways to get closer to the areas where the hostages are being held. If the Cuban detainees decide to kill the hostages, the tactical team must be able to launch an assault on a moment's notice.
We've got 2 people guarding the American dorm.
This is not something where you play a video game and after it's over, you hit your reset button and everybody's alive again. You're talking about the lives of human beings here, and you have a tremendous responsibility to try to get those people out.
Colson and Blakeney go back into the tunnels underneath the prison. One of the tunnels leads to the prison's electrical room. It's located right outside the American dorm, where most of the hostages are held.
We were literally on the other side of the window from inmates that were right across the walkway from where the hostages were being held. By doing that, we moved our response time from half an hour to 10 seconds. It was a tremendous leap in our capability at that point.
With the FBI SWAT teams and Delta Force in place, they will be in a better position to protect the hostages if negotiations break down.
Until they start harming a hostage, there's no reason for us to try to gain forcible entry to save these people. We therefore will wait as long as it takes.
The rioters have enough food to survive for up to a year. The day after Thanksgiving, they erect a Christmas tree on the roof of the building.
That was very disheartening to us. Maybe they didn't intend it psychologically to be that way. We interpret it as we are going to be here through Christmas.
On day 8 of the crisis, prison guards stationed in the tunnel hear the sound of a drill. One guard recognizes the voice of Thomas Silverstein, the most vicious inmate in the federal prison system. They think Silverstein is searching for a way out.
We knew he would absolutely kill a hostage if it would help him escape.
Weldon Kennedy asks Danny Colson to go back into the tunnels to apprehend Silverstein.
So we walked down the tunnel, and we did a tactical formation going down the tunnel, and we had lights in our weapons. Suddenly we noticed there was water on the floor, and then the water started getting deeper, and it was over the tops of our shoes, and then over our ankles and up to our knees. And what we finally realized is that that tunnel was actually flooded.
The water flooding the tunnels had been dumped by National Guard helicopters to fight the fires. Looking further into the tunnel, he can see water fills it to the ceiling. He knows there is no way Thomas Silverstein can be in there.
And what they were hearing was there were tubes, ventilation tubes, that were above the water line. So the guards were actually hearing his voice, but we knew he wasn't going to get out.
Still, Colson knows that Silverstein is as dangerous inside the prison as he is on the outside.
He was a sociopath, and he'd proven he would commit murder. So had he done that, had he attempted to harm a guard or anybody else in there, it would have caused us to have to go in and launch a rescue we didn't want to have to launch. And again, we were faced with significant loss of life.
Knowing Thomas Silverstein is such a dangerous wild card, FBI negotiator D. Rosario must convince the detainees to turn him over.
United States, okay?
I emphasized and kept re-emphasizing the fact that Tommy Silverstein could become a very grave liability to the Cuban detainees and to their cause and to what they were trying to attain. I was told that they would think about it.
Rosario tells the rioters that until Silverstein is back behind bars, the hostages are in grave danger. As long as the vicious killer roams free, the standoff could come to a sudden and violent end. More than a week into the intense standoff with Cuban detainees at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, FBI negotiators worry that a dangerous American prisoner could jeopardize a peaceful end to the conflict.
What I suggested to them was that at some point or another, it would be in your best interest to turn Tommy Silverstein over to us.
Special Agent D. Rosario tries to convince the rioters that Silverstein is a serious threat to prison employees who are being held hostage. The American inmate is jeopardizing their position in the negotiations. A short time later, a large group of detainees appears at the Sallyport gate of the main cell block.
And there was about 100 Cubans screaming, waving their sabers in the air. And I could see they had Silverstein. And in the midst of all these screaming Cubans, they literally threw Silverstein at us.
Detainees tell agents how they captured Silverstein.
So they gained access to the pharmacy. They took some narcotic. They put it in a can of fruit cocktail, which he was known to like, and fed him fruit cocktail laced liberally with this drug, which in effect knocked him out.
The FBI viewed Silverstein's capture as an act of good faith.
That told us a lot. They don't want to hurt the hostages.
It showed the negotiators that these Cubans were responsible. They were willing to do things to cooperate with us in order to reach a common goal, which is a great step in any negotiation process.
On December 1st, a separate riot at Louisiana's Oakdale Penitentiary is resolved. The Cuban detainees incarcerated at Oakdale agree to release their hostages if the INS will review their cases.
The government of the United States, through the voice of the Attorney General, told them, you know, it's not unreasonable to give you a hearing.
De Rosario offers the Atlanta detainees the same deal. The hostage takers have gotten exactly what they want, but still, negotiations stall. Audio surveillance reveals the rioters think the FBI will not use deadly force to remove them from the prison, that they would have a fighting chance to overpower federal forces.
The Cubans thought that the FBI and the other assets would come in with nightsticks and batons and just duke it out.
The next day, Colson decides to send the hostage takers an indelible message. The detainee agrees to talk with Colson.
And he said, I need to go to the restroom. So I said, wait right here. So I went around the barrier and I got the Marshall's SOG team and the New York City SWAT team. I got them all up and I said, put on all your gear and line up along the walls and look mean. And he walked around that barricade, and when he walked down that corridor, he literally jumped off the ground. And I said, this is not going to be a nightstick duel with your swords. We're going to use deadly force.
The rioters agree to the terms of the surrender. On day 12 of the standoff, the Cuban detainees release their hostages.
I will never, ever forget those guys coming through that sally point and walking right by me, and the look of relief. They were haggard and they were tired and they were worn out, but this great sense of relief, and they were all smiling ear to ear.
When we finally walked out with hostages, not one of them having been harmed in any way, we regarded that as a huge success.
After 12 intense days, the Atlanta prison riot is over.
One of the most important things, it sort of focused the American public on the plight of the Cubans. And I think that was important. They did have a story to tell. They just told it in the wrong way.
After the riots, all detainees are granted an INS hearing. Some are released. Others with criminal records or mental disabilities are repatriated back to Cuba. The rest remain in prison. A contract killing. A brutal murder. A neighborhood in chaos. For the New York City Police Department and the FBI, New York City becomes the front lines in a relentless battle. The enemy, powerful drug dealers who will stop at nothing to protect their profits.
In the 1980s, the drug trade in New York City was a nightmare. Dealers made millions. Street violence was out of control. The NYPD battled the drug gangs, only to become their target. I'm Jim Kellstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Hundreds of FBI agents and police officers launched a bold plan to stop the violence and shut down the gangs' deadly business.
In New York City in the 1980s, the NYPD was fighting a losing battle against the drug lords.
Okay.
NYPD Detective Sergeant Mike McGinnis worked narcotics in the borough of Queens.
There were several major organizations selling cocaine and heroin in southeast Queens, and one of them was Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols' organization.
26-year-old Queens native Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols is a drug wholesaler. He distributes cocaine and heroin to mid-level dealers. His price for a kilo of coke is $50,000. He's worth millions. Nichols protects his operation by surrounding himself with a tight group of loyal associates. Many are family members. For police in Queens, cracking Nichols' operation will not be easy. His headquarters is at a deli at 107th Avenue and 150th Street in Jamaica, Queens.
We had conducted surveillances there. We had talked to many informants there. We had done a lot of buy and bust operations there, where we'd send out undercovers and buy drugs, and it was a continuing problem in the area. But we couldn't really make a case at that point against Fat Cat or any of the principals in his organization. That all changed in July 1985. One of our units was doing a buy and bust operation and developed some information that led us to get a search warrant for Fat Cat's grocery store and for an apartment above the grocery store. The informant told us that there was weapons, cash, and numerous drugs stored there. Myself and two detectives went into the grocery store. I went behind the counter and I walked towards the rear of the counter, and I saw there was a light on in the back room. So I went into the back room. There were three men behind a big desk, and I realized one of them was Fat Cat Nichols.
Nichols, put your hands up on the wall. Put your hands up on the wall. Put your hands up on the wall.
Police order the men up against the wall.
Put your hands on the wall now. Hands up.
Nichols reaches down for something.
Check the chair over here. You understand?
Under a towel on the chair where Nichols was sitting,
Check the chair.
detectives find a loaded automatic and a revolver.
Those are mine, man.
Police search the room and find heroin, cocaine, and $30,000 in cash. Several ounces of marijuana is on Nichols' desk.
The raiding party that went to the second floor apartment found $150,000 in cash in boxes.
Wow, that's a lot of cash.
Hundreds, perhaps thousands of pieces of cocaine, street cocaine wrapped in tinfoil, and glassines of heroin and additional weapons.
Nichols is arrested on drugs and weapons charges. 24 hours later, he's free on $70,000 bail. At the time of his arrest, Nichols was already on parole. He reports to his parole officer to see if the arrest violated the terms of his parole. He tells his parole officer, Brian Rooney, that he was only in the grocery to order a sandwich.
Take care of it for me, man. That's what we're going to try to do. All right, thank you. Just have a seat right here. Okay. All right, thanks.
Rooney calls McGinnis to check his story out.
So I told him what had happened, that we had arrested Nichols in the grocery store, that he had a number of weapons, but unfortunately he made bail, and I'm sure he's gone. And Rooney said to me, no, he's not. He says he's sitting outside my office here.
Rooney rearrests Nichols on the spot for violating his parole.
Now, for Nichols, what that meant was, even though he had made bail on the case where we got him, he was in on the parole violation, and there's no way around that. You can't get bail on it. So not counting the trouble that he was in with me, he owed 14 years to the state. So he was in big trouble.
A week later, McGinnis and Rooney testify at Nichols' parole hearing.
I briefly described what had happened that night, and the adjudicator immediately continued his violation of parole, which meant he was in. He was entitled to one more hearing like that, and then he would go back in for the remainder of those 14 years.
But the drug dealer has no intention of letting that happen. 2 months after the hearing, Nichols parole officer Brian Rooney gives a co-worker a ride home from work. He drives through South Jamaica, a neighborhood in Queens. He knows this section of Queens is dangerous. But he has no idea he is being followed. Suddenly, a car pulls up beside him. Brian Rooney is shot once in the arm and once in the back. He dies instantly. His killers disappear into the night. Police arrive quickly, but there is nothing they can do. They process the scene and find little evidence. No shell casings were left behind. No one saw the shooting. News of the murder quickly reaches Detective Sergeant Mike McGinnis.
Sergeant who worked in my office called me up and told me about it. Said they just killed a parole officer up on Supton Boulevard, and it was Brian Rooney. He was a very fine guy and a good parole officer. He was just a real good combination of social worker, police officer. That's necessary to be a good parole officer.
Police hit the streets to gather intelligence and find the killer. Rooney's murder is the latest in a string of homicides in South Jamaica. Rival drug gangs battle each other for territory and control of the profits.
The homicide rate in that part of the city where the drugs were being sold was skyrocketing. Shootings were commonplace. Citizens were terrified to come out of their houses. And for that reason, we knew that we had no choice but to go after these drug gangs.
The NYPD steps up their efforts in Operation Cleanup, a major long-term anti-drug operation. They bring in hundreds of officers from precincts all over the city. The operation targets drug dealers in the Jamaica Queens area where Rooney was murdered. Detectives also canvass the neighborhood near Sutphin Boulevard where the shooting occurred.
Hey man, come here for a minute.
They interview locals, hoping that somebody saw something out of the ordinary the day Rooney was killed.
What you want to know?
I know you heard about the parole officer that got shot, right?
Yeah, man, I heard about the parole officer that got shot. What you want to know about that?
You got any names? Heard anything on the street?
Two dudes is all I know. Two dudes.
That's all you can tell me?
Two dudes.
Police learn that two men associated with Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols were both seen in the area, Howard Mason and Perry Bellamy. Nichols had a strong motivation for killing Rooney. Investigators suspect he may have ordered Mason and Bellamy to kill his parole officer. In 1985, parole officer Brian Rooney is shot to death on a street in South Jamaica, Queens. Police suspect that one of his parolees, Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols, ordered the hit. Mike McGinnis, former detective sergeant with the NYPD.
We were all astounded with what happened to Brian Rooney, that they would have the audacity to kill him. But I think their thinking was if they got Rooney out of the way, Nichols would be able to make the street. And where they got that from, I don't know. But that was their thinking.
As the detective who arrested Nichols, McGinnis knows he could be next on the hit list.
I looked over my shoulder. I was careful, but I never let it stop me from what I was doing. To have it happen where somebody actually says, I'm going to kill this officer to get a benefit and to maybe get myself out of jail, that was very unusual. And I think people in law enforcement and the citizens in general found it kind of unnerving.
Police know that Howard Pappy Mason, a lieutenant in the Nichols organization, and Perry Bellamy, a Mason associate, were seen in the neighborhood the night Rooney was murdered. An anonymous caller claims Bellamy was outside the car when Rooney was shot. The next day, another informant tells detectives where to find Bellamy. The tip leads investigators right to him.
Stick your hands up on the wall! What? Stick your hands on the wall now! Stick your hands on the wall!
Bellamy is picked up on the street in his neighborhood and brought in for questioning.
You understand me? I got my rights!
He admits he saw Rooney just hours before he was murdered.
In the car with Rooney.
He claims he knew about the hit and tried to warn Rooney. That's why he was seen in the area that night.
You set him up, I think.
I know if something happened to a cop.
After hours of questioning, detectives learn he did more than warn Rooney.
Look, so that's who did.
Bellamy reveals he was in the car with Rooney the night he was killed.
You're just gonna add on more problems for yourself.
He says Howard Mason shot Rooney. Bellamy was in jail weeks before the murder. He claims to have overheard Nichols telling another inmate that his parole officer was going to get what's coming to him. Authorities charged Bellamy with aiding and abetting the murder of Officer Rooney. Next, detectives tracked down Howard Pappy Mason.
What's up, officer?
What's your name?
Mason.
Well, stick your hands up against the wall, folks.
Officer, I don't
stick your hands on the wall.
In the suspect's boot, they find a fully loaded .22 Derringer. Mason is charged with murder and weapons possession. Investigators have put the conspirators behind bars. But they can't prove Fat Cat Nichols ordered Mason and Bellamy to kill his parole officer. While police try to build a case against Nichols, who is still in jail, his organization continues to grow. In 1987, the illegal drug crisis in New York goes from bad to worse. A new drug explodes onto the scene.
The crack cocaine swept over the community. I've never seen anything like it.
FBI Special Agent David Higgins worked drug cases in New York.
Okay. Basically, what happens in the preparation of crack, you can take a relatively small amount of cocaine and combining it with other ingredients, you stretch it tremendously so that something that might have been sold previously as a gram amount for $100 could turn around and make the drug trafficker $1,000.
The drug sells cheap, as little as $2 a vial, and it's highly addictive. For a working-class neighborhood like South Jamaica, crack cocaine is the perfect storm.
Because of the high level of addiction, the drug users were repeatedly looking to get high, and therefore they were out trying to find sources of income anywhere they could. Naturally, they turned to crimes such as burglary and robbery, and of course, the general level of crime in these neighborhoods increased as a result.
The NYPD steps up its efforts. They rename Operation Cleanup Operation Queens. In the early 80s, a federal organized crime drug enforcement task force was formed in New York City to go after the drug dealers and the major distributors. Special Agent Richard Martinez was assigned to the task force.
It was set up as an organization that utilized FBI, New York City Police Department, Drug Enforcement Administration, and other agencies to coordinate a direct attack against these elements.
Here it is, right here, South Jamaica, okay?
The OCDF task force was divided up into squads, and each squad had its own mission to accomplish. Our particular mission happened to be the cocaine, crack cocaine, and heroin dealers operating in the city.
The task force is investigating several drug gangs in Jamaica, Queens.
We felt that was the best thing we could do for the citizens in that community, was to get as much power into this group as that was going to go after these guys. As much power as possible.
Dealing drugs in South Jamaica, Queens is a lucrative business. The high profits lead to more competition and more violence. Nearly half the serious crimes in New York City are crack-related. In October 1987, a taxi dispatcher is murdered for testifying about a gun battle she witnessed. A month later, a Guyanese immigrant complains to police that drug dealers have been selling crack on his street. The next evening, someone firebombs his home.
Call fire department. What is the number? 911.
Yeah, someone just threw something through a window.
NYPD officers from the 103rd Precinct in South Jamaica are assigned to protect the witness and his family. But the threats continue. Thomas Godbolt, a member of Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols' organization, approaches the witness on the street. Godbolt says he has 3 weeks to leave the neighborhood, or his entire family will die.
You understand me? I hear what you're saying, man.
In 1987, drug dealers rule South Jamaica, Queens. Citizens brave enough to stand up to the dealers are intimidated and murdered. The New York City Police Department and a federal task force turn up the heat on all the drug organizations in Jamaica, Queens. They make over 2,000 arrests for the sale and possession of drugs in the 4 months between October 1987 and January 1988. In late January 1988, one of Lorenzo Nichols' lieutenants, Thomas Mustafa Godbolt, is sent to Rikers Island for threatening the Guyanese witness. On February 24th, Howard Pappy Mason, suspected of shooting parole officer Brian Rooney, is convicted on a weapons possession charge. The next day, Lorenzo Nichols is sentenced to 25 years to life on 11 counts of drugs and weapons possession.
We had cut off the head of the snake and caught a couple of his top people with him and had a great case, and so we really felt we had put that organization pretty much on the sidelines.
The NYPD and the FBI are making headway in the battle to take back the streets of South Jamaica from the drug dealers. But the war is about to take a dark turn. February 26, 1988, just days after Nichols and Mason were convicted, Officer Edward Byrne is guarding the Guyanese witness. Even with the man who threatened his family in jail, the witness continues to receive threats. Byrne is a rookie, just 22 years old. This is just another routine night. At 3 a.m., a car drives past Officer Byrne's position. There are 4 men inside. The sedan drives around the block and out of sight. 20 minutes later, 3 men sneak up behind Officer Burns' car. The witness hears the gunshots. At 3:28 a.m., dispatch sends out the call, "Officer down" in Jamaica, Queens. Police arrive at the scene minutes later. Both front windows of Officer Burns' police cruiser have been shot out. The rookie cop is dead.
Every police officer responds to that. Every police officer takes that personal when a police officer is murdered.
The witness Officer Byrne was protecting tells police he heard the shots and saw several men get in a tan-colored car and speed away. Investigators find an abandoned 1976 tan Olds Cutlass parked about 2 miles from where Burns was shot. They find nothing in the car linking it to the murder.
Right after the murder of Officer Byrne, the New York City Police Department started cracking down on all the drug dealers. A tremendous amount of heat was put on all the drug dealers in Jamaica, Queens. They wanted the murders of Officer Byrne.
Hundreds of police officers working 12-hour shifts blanket 3 precincts. The 103rd, the 105th, and the 113th in southeastern Queens. They raid nearly 200 locations and question more than 300 suspected drug dealers. Investigators believe Lorenzo Nichols ordered the murder of his parole officer from jail. And the man who threatened the witness Officer Byrne was protecting had ties to Nichols' organization. Nichols is a natural suspect. At the time of Officer Byrne's murder, several members of the FBI task force are investigating a Queens drug dealer with ties to the Nichols organization.
What we did was we simply shifted focus. We were looking at something called the Smith organization, who had dealings with a number of Nichols associates. We simply moved full power. We looked right at the Nichols organization because we were gaining intelligence from the same informants that were telling us about the Smith organization. They had intelligence on the Nichols organization. We targeted the members of the organization who were still on the street operating his drug conspiracy group.
To get inside the organization, investigators use a variety of weapons. They set up undercover drug buys and use telephone wiretaps. If Nichols was involved in the murder of Officer Byrne, he's just made the biggest mistake of his life. Now the resources of the FBI, the NYPD, and the DEA are focused on bringing down his operation. A rookie cop is killed, shot to death on a street in New York City. 22-year-old Officer Eddie Byrne gave his life protecting a witness from a deadly drug gang. On February 29th, Officer Eddie Byrne is laid to rest. 10,000 police officers attend the funeral.
You can't kill a police officer and get away with it.
Special Agent Richard Martinez.
That's why police react so quickly. You can't kill a police officer and get away with it.
New York City Mayor Ed Koch vows to find those responsible. The city offers a $10,000 reward for information leading to the conviction of Byrne's killers. The community is outraged. After years of being intimidated, they are fed up with the drug dealers. Special Agent David Higgins.
Shootings would take place at any time of day. Many times bystanders, innocent bystanders in the neighborhood would be caught in the crossfire. And there were a number of notorious cases in which children were killed as a result of these shootings.
Police set up a hotline to field tips. They answer 400 calls every 8 hours. Within days, the reward money climbs to $130,000. 3 days after the shooting, an anonymous caller says he knows who shot the cop. The detective convinces the caller to meet him. The tipster tells police the shooter was Todd Scott. Police are familiar with Scott. He's a suspect in the murder of a prostitute. Detectives go looking for Scott. At the apartment of a relative, they find a witness who is willing to talk. He tells detectives he knows the men who carried out the shooting. He was present when the hit was planned, and he knows who ordered it. On February 24th, only hours after his conviction on a gun charge, Howard Mason called one of his dealers, Philip Copeland, from a payphone at Rikers Island. The next day, Copeland met with fellow gang members Todd Scott, David McClary, and Scott Cobb in an apartment 10 blocks from the murder scene.
Just got back talking to your boy Mason, man.
Copeland told them the boss is mad. He ordered them to hit a cop, any cop.
But we gotta take out a cop.
The price of the contract was $8,000.
Do it, but gotta take him out.
According to the informant, the men drew straws to choose the shooter. Todd Scott would pull the trigger.
There it is. Y'all got it, man. What you gonna do? That's what's up. That's what I like to hear.
The officer's fate was sealed. The next morning, Scott came back to the apartment bragging about what they had done. They only collected a few $100s of the $8,000 they'd been promised.
That individual told how the murder actually went down, who they chose, that it wasn't Officer Byrne chosen as an individual, but they chose the police officer that was guarding the cooperating witness's house, that he was a target of opportunity.
Howard Mason wanted Byrne's murder to send a chilling message to law enforcement.
Your reputation is everything on the street if you're a drug trafficker. If it's known in your neighborhood that you are unwilling to take violent retribution for acts against you or your organization, you're not going to last very long as a drug trafficker. This was a killing that really galvanized law enforcement in New York City. The execution of a uniformed police officer who's targeted not because of any particular act or case, but because he was a police officer in and of itself.
The NYPD finally have names to link to the shooting. They issue warrants for Philip Copeland, Todd Scott, Scott Cobb, and David McClary. Copeland is already in jail on another charge. Police go looking for the other 3 men. Later that same afternoon, Scott Cobb's mother calls police. She wants to arrange her son's surrender. He never shows up. Investigators believe Cobb will eventually contact his mother. They install a trap on her telephone line to catch the numbers of all incoming calls. The shooting continues to dominate the news, and police keep up the pressure on the street. It's not long before another important witness comes forward. A young woman tells detectives she witnessed the shooting of Officer Byrne. The woman said she was on the street when she heard a shot and saw men around the police car. She hid behind a car until the men left. She doesn't think they saw her. Investigators show the witness photo lineups. She confirms Todd Scott as the man she saw at the passenger window of the patrol car. She also identifies David McClary as the man standing by the driver's side window and Copeland is the man she saw standing behind McClary.
Thank you very much.
Police now have a witness to the shooting. They need to find the 3 suspects still at large. The day after the trap on Scott Cobb's mother's phone is set up, police get a hit. An incoming call is traced to an address in Queens Village. It's one of several safe houses owned by Howard Mason. On March 3rd, less than a week after the Byrne shooting, detectives spot Scott Cobb.
Hey, man.
Freeze! Step down and put your hands behind your back. Slow, slow.
He is quickly taken into custody. Police search the safe house. In the basement, they find Todd Scott. At noon the next day, David McClary surrenders to police. He is accompanied by his mother. Of the 4 men accused of Byrne's death, McClary is the only one who doesn't have a criminal record. Todd Scott and David McClary give conflicting statements. Each accuse the other of actually pulling the trigger. All versions of the events place Scott Cobb behind the wheel of the getaway car. Police and prosecutors are eventually able to piece together this version of events. At 3:25 a.m., Todd Scott distracted Officer Byrne by tapping on the window on the passenger side of the patrol car. David McClary shot Officer Byrne 5 times through the driver's side window. Philip Copeland was just behind McClary. All 4 men are charged with second-degree murder. But for the agents and police, larger questions loom. Did Howard "Pappy" Mason act on his own? Was Fat Cat Nichols involved in the murder? And can they prove it? Police and FBI agents suspect one of 2 men is responsible for ordering the murder of a New York City police officer. Drug wholesaler Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols, or his former employee, Pappy Mason. Special Agent David Higgins.
The murder of police officer Byrne was a state investigation. It was conducted by the New York City Police Department. And while they conducted their homicide investigation, the federal authorities and the local members of the federal task force conducted a parallel investigation targeting the Nichols organization as a whole.
Investigators realized that it's not enough to put the organization's leaders and their lieutenants in jail. If they hope to stop the violence, they must destroy the gangs. Fat Cat Nichols' drug operation is huge. It brings in over $20 million a year.
We had already established through informant information that the Nichols Organization Nerve Center was the Big Mac Deli located in the Laurelton section of Queens, New York. We immediately obtained subpoenas to examine the telephone toll records for that location.
To investigate this large and dangerous organization, the FBI turns to wiretaps. Special Agent Richard Martinez is the assigned case agent.
Only that type of investigation can collect information on major conspiracies. When an undercover officer deals with one person buying drugs, he's dealt with 1 or 2 people. To get an enterprise or an organization, you need the ability to wiretap.
Agents wiretap Nichols' headquarters, but they immediately run into a problem.
The suspects involved in the Nichols organization were so paranoid about the attention of law enforcement in the neighborhood, which had occurred as a result of the Byrne shooting. They became convinced that they were the target of a wiretap. So they immediately shifted their operation to a new location.
The agents target Nichols' family. A week after the shooting, the FBI begins wiretapping Lorenzo Nichols' sister.
We knew that a lot of mid-level distributors were dealing with her. So hers was an ideal phone to get into. She was talking to Lorenzo Nichols. She was talking to about 12 mid-level distributors that she was bagging for. She was passing on instructions or conversations from the drug dealers to Lorenzo Nichols. She was in the middle of this whole organization, and that was the beauty of it. She liked to talk.
Nichols' sister is paranoid someone is spying on her.
Every day she was saying, my phone's tapped, don't talk. But then she would turn around and talk.
For one day.
At times she would leave the phone off the hook, which is basically a bug into her house. And you could hear her have conversations with these guys when they would pick up their drugs.
Hurry up.
Over the wiretap, the FBI intercepts a key call between Nichols and his sister. They're talking about Pappy Mason.
In one particular conversation, she discussed why Pappy Mason had done that thing, a reference to the actual murder of Officer Byrne. And Lorenzo responded that he didn't know why he did it. Pappy Mason had a reputation of being a kind of violent guy, and Lorenzo, near the end, was kind of pushing him away. Not really wanting to directly deal with him because he drew too much pressure from law enforcement. All indications prior to that Lorenzo Nichols was involved in this. But through that conversation, which was later backed up with debriefing of cooperating witnesses, Howard Mason ordered the execution and murder of Police Officer Byrne. Pappy Mason thought that the police department disrespected him, so therefore he ordered his contemporaries to go out and to kill any police officer.
Nichols was not involved in the murder of Officer Byrne, but his operation still continues to grow and to supply very dangerous street gangs with product.
We were able to establish from listening on the telephone that, in fact, Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols was communicating with core members of the conspiracy. Every week or 2 weeks, a group of individuals would go up and have meetings with him and receive orders from him in person as to how the operation was to be managed.
Agents place a microphone in the visiting room at Rikers Island. They try to listen in on Lorenzo Nichols' meetings with his lieutenants. Unfortunately, the sound quality is too poor to hear anything. Agents and police continue to build a case.
We learned their methods of distribution. We learned their methods of drug preparation. We were able to identify some of their sources of supply, who was communicating with who, how it was done, what the level of their trafficking was, who some of their customers were as a result. And it established a hierarchy of the organization for us.
Yes.
We continued to conduct surveillances related to the information that we received from the wiretap.
But surveillance is difficult. Most successful drug dealers are savvy and know how law enforcement gathers information.
The drug traffickers employ counter-surveillance techniques. They actually pay people on the street for a radius of several blocks to maintain a lookout for police authorities in the area.
When agents get enough information from the wiretap, they make arrests.
If at a time, say, for example, we intercepted a call in which there was a drug transaction occurring or a transport of drugs from one location to another location, I could say to the investigators working the case, we need to take this load off.
After 5 long months, agents meet with the prosecutor.
It was time to put some charges on some subjects, to get some cooperators, and to execute the search warrants, to get the guns, to get the drugs that'll confirm the conversations that you have.
Martinez feels they have enough probable cause to issue arrest and search warrants.
you got to know when it's time to bring the case down. And that's when we brought this case down in August.
The prosecutor agrees. It's time to take down the Nichols organization. After 5 months of investigation, Special Agent Richard Martinez plans a complex and potentially dangerous arrest operation. The goal is to completely dismantle the Nichols drug organization.
The jury needs to hear 3 things to prove guilt beyond a doubt. 1, they want the testimony of somebody inside, a cooperator. As an investigator, I want to provide tapes of the participants in the organization in their day-to-day activities. And lastly, physical evidence.
The arrest operation will hit over 20 locations. Agents believe the search warrants will give them the physical evidence they need: guns, drugs, and money. They also have arrest warrants for 38 members of Nichols' organization. They hope a few of these people will turn and become cooperators.
When a jury looks at a cooperator, the conversations that have been either intercepted through Title III or consensually recording, and physical evidence, and they all say the same thing, there's only one verdict that a jury can come back with, and that's guilty.
Agents prepare affidavits and coordinate the 400 bodies needed to execute the operation. Everyone involved understands the risks.
There's always danger when you're executing arrest warrants and search warrants. You never know how a person's going to react. That's why you go well-armed and well-equipped and with enough people to control a scenario to minimize that potential violence.
August 11th, 1988. The affidavits have been written. The arrest and search warrants have been issued. The arrest teams are prepared. Everything is in place.
Everybody knows what they're going to do, knows who they're going to pick up, knows where they have to go, and it's just time to execute.
Several of the targeted locations are very dangerous.
In this case, we deployed 3 SWAT teams in 3 locations in which we thought we might have a potential violent reaction.
The teams hit locations where drugs are being stored and sold.
Fortunately, we never tipped our hand in this investigation, so none of the defendants knew we were coming when we decided to come for them.
Nichols' sister is surprised by the arrest team. She reacts with anger.
This was a unique investigation that mothers of the main subjects of this case were involved. Lorenzo Nichols' mom was involved. Howard Mason's mother was involved. Howard Mason's mom we arrested with kilos of crack cocaine and a handgun in her residence.
All over the Jamaica section of Queens, one by one, members of the Nichols organization are arrested and evidence is collected.
During the execution of the search warrants, we found guns, we found a substantial amount of packaging material, a substantial amount of crack cocaine, and numerous individuals with cash money, and seized all those items.
Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols and Howard Pappy Mason are both arrested in prison on drug charges that will keep them behind bars forever. By the end of the day, 30 people are arrested. 5 pieces of property are seized. Nichols' sister and other key players in the organization decide to become cooperators. The multi-million-dollar violent drug operation is effectively destroyed. For Lorenzo Nichols, it was the murder of Officer Edward Byrne, a murder he had nothing to do with, that finally brought down his drug empire.
This case dismantled the Lorenzo Nichols organization. Lorenzo was convicted and went to trial. Every member of this organization that was charged was convicted and went to prison.
In 1992, Lorenzo Nichols also pleads guilty to ordering the murder of parole officer Brian Rooney. Later that same year, there is a surprising development in the Rooney murder case. Randolph Lucas is arrested on an unrelated charge and confesses his involvement in the crime. He claims his brother Eric drove the car and that he shot and killed Brian Rooney. They were hired by a Nichols associate to hurt Rooney, but they panicked and fatally shot the parole officer. No one knows why Perry Bellamy claimed to have been at the scene that night, and why he said he witnessed Howard Mason shoot Brian Rooney. The NYPD anti-drug operation and the federal task force targeting Queens drug dealers had a decided effect on drug-related crime in New York City. FBI Special Agent David Higgins.
The task force cases in New York sent the message to the streets eventually that crime doesn't pay, that if you're going to be involved in violent drug trafficking in New York City, you're ultimately going to face justice in a federal court. I believe that message resounded on the streets because the crime rate in New York City and other major U.S. cities, the violent crime rate dropped significantly in the 1990s. And it's my belief that it dropped because of all these successful prosecutions.
Brian Rooney's name was placed on the memorial for parole officers killed in the line of duty. A foundation was created in Officer Edward Burns' name. Their legacy is the destruction of a deadly organization that threatened the neighborhoods they had sworn to protect.